Hi, I'm Rihanna Daliwal. I am a researcher in residence for the year-long residency program of non-extractive architecture at the VAC Zattere in Venice, Italy. This interview is a part of a series of conversations that we are having for the non-extractive architecture project, which consists of a research residency, an exhibition in Venice at the VAC, and a series of conversations and guest lectures that attempt to question the possibility of a non-extractive practice of architecture. So far, the research has taken a very broad approach to understanding extraction in architecture. We have investigated the extraction of raw materials from their sources, but we are also interested in other forms of immaterial extraction, such as the extraction of value, culture, labor, and knowledge. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Studio HOTmess, a collaboration between Charlotte Moore and Maria Saeki, who both recently completed their MAs in architecture at the Royal College of Art in 2019. Treading the borderline between spatial forms of art, architecture, and product design, their practice uses site-specific research and the material experimentation to translate research into sensitive and social design outcomes that respond to the contemporary socio-bio-geophysical issues faced by humans and our natural world today. The HOT.messes are currently commissioned by the White Gold Project to develop the project Edible Hinterlands. They have been part of exhibitions at the San Mei Gallery, a Dutch Design Week, Leach 100 Raku Weekend, London Design Festival with the V&A, People's Kitchen Day of Design, and Palermo Manifesta Biennale. So Charlotte and Maria of Studio HOTmess, thank you for joining us today. Before we start our Q&A session, Studio HOTmess will give a short presentation discussing their facade tile project titled Edible Hinterlands, focusing on the design challenges that they had to overcome in order to produce a facade that was the themes of non-extractive and slow architecture in real-world production economies. So now I will hand it over to you.
Hi, thank you, Rihanna, for inviting us. We are excited to be part of the MEA discussions. We have recently been focusing on developing tools and methodologies to weave native flora into the local built environment in a non-destructive manner in our project Edible Hinterlands. So we were going to take you through the process of this. In this project, rethinking the boundary between natural and built environments became crucial as we strive to create an environment where vegetation can safely occupy the facade of an existing building without extensive retrofitting work. We received the commission in January 2020 to design a facade for Cafe Tango, a small traditional cafe in the centre of St. Austell, Cornwall. The commission came from the White Gold Project, an arts initiative working to celebrate St. Austell as the UK home of China clay. By finding a plethora of temporary and permanent ceramic artwork in the centre and peripheries of St. Austell town, the project was originally conceived as a prototype, but we've been able to realise it as a full facade through funding from the Cornish Heritage Council. The brief asked us to relate to the White Gold Ceramic Festival, celebrating conviviality, ceramics, food, plants, and the social. The tiles have developed through the three elements of colour, form, and plant, resulting in the design that we now have in production.
The first topic that we're going to address is colour. The next slide shows Melba Pit, outside of St. Austell, which is a sculpted landscape in kaolin deposit that is currently being quarried by the French multinational and industrial mineral company Imerys. You can see in the landscape that there is kaolin, which is the white areas, and the waste product iron oxide, which you can see here as patches of orange. And there are distinct hues of white, pink, and orange emerging from the ground amongst all the quarries in the area. Cornwall is one of the most mineral-rich lands in Britain, and metals such as tin, copper, zinc, lead, manganese, arsenic, and silver have all regularly been mined since prehistoric time, resulting in a unique area where all these minerals are found together. In satellite view, the waste iron oxide and the useful kaolin products are more distinct. We are on a mission to learn about how we could incorporate these colours into the tiles. So with the help of online research, the Dutch researcher Casti van Noort and further testing, we learn the process of collecting, drying, sifting, and mixing methods to turn the pigments into glazes. We collected leftover earths that had been manually separated in the mining process, not chemically broken, and then processed them via natural, non-energy intensive methods, such as washing them with water and leaving them to dry in the sun. We found that in Cornwall, it is much easier to find the old spoil heaps, easy to access as nature's reclaiming the land. This allowed us to explore the possibility of incorporating local colours into the tiles. Usually, pigments and ceramic glazes have to travel far or have been produced artificially. However, the scalability of this proved more difficult in reality than we thought.
So the next area that we looked into was the form of the tiles. In the early 19th century, the China clay industry revolutionized the town and reshaped the landscape and the clay country. Leading potters and ceramic producers began to mine their own pits. St. Austell was once the world center of China clay extraction and had one of the largest deposits in the world. Cornish kaolin was found to be not only abundant, but also of an exceptional quality. So you can see the map of Cornwall here, and the site is here in St. Austell with this large China clay pit you can see. Both the above and below landscape has been influenced by mining throughout Cornwall, and it is standard procedure to check that you are not building above a tunnel or a lode or a mine shaft.
This map depicts about a 5-minute walking area within a little village called Harrowbarrow. And you can see that there is a massive silver lode that runs directly through the middle of the picture. But there are also many other lodes, like a tin lode near the top, a Will George lode in the centre, as well as areas of suspected mining activity, disused mine shafts, and spoil heaps. All of these contribute to very difficult planning conditions when you're trying to build a house or any form of architecture.
It became important for us to reference the landscape of the mines being reclaimed by nature on the facade to give an identity to the community. We took cues from the surrounding sculpted landscape, such as these satellite views, and bloated the shape of a traditional wall tile to provide and mimic the cracks that appear in the kaolin pits as a bare landscape for nature to colonize.
The third topic and piece to the tiles is Plantain. Due to the temperate and wet climate in Cornwall, plants easily colonize the bare ground of disused clay pits, resulting in unique new biodiversity and ecosystems composed of garden escapees, as well as native and naturalized species. The bottom right image shows the mines in use, with the formal disposal of kaolin via sky tips. These haven't been used any longer due to potential for land slips, but the other two images depict how these sky tips were becoming colonized, and the nature was necessary on these in order to stop them from slipping. Leading on from this, we conducted research into the wild flora that is abundant in these recolonized areas in the sky tips. We met with foragers, Joanna Pearson and Emma Gunn, and ran trials with garden curator Darren Hawkes from December 2020 onwards. This was to help us select the hardy species that will thrive in the unique aspect of the cafe facade. This led to the development of the openings to Plantain, as well as the drainage strategy at the base of the tiles. We took an interest in the edible species, and we hope to use the wall, once it is complete, as a testing ground to explore a mixture of perennial and edible native plants that can be planted onto the facade and perhaps even used in the cafe. As we evolved the planted hollow tiles, it became necessary to also develop techniques to direct rainwater flow and roof runoff in order to sustain the plant life, which is now healthily present on the facade. This led to the development of 5 tile types, and we used the same principles of undulation as the 3D planted tiles to channel water left, right, or straight. The previous slide showed that generating a low maintenance facade is key to creating an attractive method of incorporating non-extractive principles into everyday urban life. We designed a system where you use an irrigation pipe along the top of a facade. It's hidden under aluminium capping, and the water will come out of the irrigation pipe and follow the path along the undulations and channels to reach the 3D tiles which are planted. We believe that the sustainable, inclusive and technological practice of designing and creating the planted facade system is a fundamental responsibility of the architect as an agent of transformation to work alongside the occupier who will continue to maintain and enjoy the benefits of the built environment in the future. And care has to be put into laying out the tiles so the water can flow into them uniformly. So you have to lay out the 5 different tile types in a certain pattern in order to make sure the water has a direct path to each 3D tile.
Combining the 3 elements of colour, form and plant, we had our final proposal for the facade. It was informed by the shapes and colours of the clay landscape, including the pits and tips and the plant life that survives on it. And using the research, tests and prototypes, we began to detail and cost the facade with the intention of this image you can see on the screen as the final design. So the intention was to promote a slow form of architecture by hand making each tile ourselves and eliminating machinery pollution. However, over time, we realized that there was a limit to our time and labor to create the full facade, as otherwise we would be spending 4 to 5 months making tiles every weekend in order to produce 970 tiles, which is quite a lot of tiles. The seasonal weather changes in the UK and in our studio space also meant that we were finding it hard to control the temperatures, leading to over drying or under drying at different periods of the year. We looked to find a ceramic manufacturer that could help us produce the tiles. Unfortunately, due to the small size and unique processes required, local British manufacturers were unable to take on our project. So we had to look outside of the UK to the northern Italian workshops of Matter of Stuff. This still allowed us to focus on producing 25% of tiles in London following the principles of slow architecture. And working with a more established company has allowed us to produce the more technically challenging 3D tiles. However, it has also meant that we had to change the design due to budget constraints. We had to take out the groove tiles intended to channel the water in order to stay within the budget, and instead we rely on angling the irrigation pipes more accurately towards the planted tiles. Here you can see some of the mock-ups we were sent. Using waste pigments was also difficult when scaling up the production because we couldn't transport minerals as easily across borders. The colours had to be matched and digitally applied instead. And so these colours you can see are quite similar to what we want, the landscape that we saw in the photos, but aren't exactly the local minerals themselves. And in order to make everything work harmoniously, there's been an ongoing dialogue to ensure that our tiles and their tiles work together. And here's a color test of the tiles from Matter of Stuff and our color tests for our groove tiles done in London. And finally, this is the final mock-up that we've received, which we are excited to see come to fruition.
The outcome of all of this research we see is the cafe facade, and it's something that we hope we can apply elsewhere in the future. However, the main difficulty we have faced is scalability, and trying to scale up production, thinking about more non-extractive principles is difficult when you have to do it all by hand and keep within budget constraints as well. And also things like Brexit and COVID meant it was very difficult for us to either visit places that could help us make it, or transport natural materials across borders, which is not really so easy any longer. But reflecting on the process in general, as a small studio, we were able to see firsthand the method of production. Seeing every stage has allowed us to see which steps out of the entire process are the most extractive and how we can improve these so that in the future we can be less so. We see it as a starting point to improve each project we do in general. But we see also that many research strands are developing from this, not least the exciting challenge of developing a similar brief for a facade which uses non-extractive materials aside from ceramic.
So Maria and Charlotte, thank you for the presentation that you've just given us. Now we will have the Q&A session, which will be a discussion on their project that they described in the presentation. So the first question is, there is a heavy importance on locality in the concept and design process. What can we learn from our immediate surroundings, and how can we think of a new type of non-extractive architecture, but at a very local scale?
Yeah, good question. So we spent quite a lot of time in between lockdowns trying to visit St. Austell in Cornwall as much as possible, and walking around and meeting a lot of specialists in sort of specific fields, like a local forager, sort of artists, other ceramic artists who know the area well. All of that was really helpful in kind of bringing together a design that felt authentic to the area. And we also worked with Cornwall College students, which also allowed us to kind of have conversations with the young people of St. Austell to, make our project feel a little bit more rooted in St. Austell. And I think there was also a lot of good connections that we were able to make through the project of White Gold organization, because we were able to talk to other ceramicists who had already done a lot of social engagement with the local people, and we sort of knew that the community were sort of over, they'd done too much of community engagement, because you can kind of be asked too often, what do you want and why, how can we improve your area and things like that. So I think it was good to learn from those things and try and do something that was different and also natural, and not just kind of forcing answers out of people. Mm-hmm. So that was helpful. And then I think what we focused on more was the social outcome of the piece. So instead of doing too much of that community engagement, we were recreating the story of the natural succession of the mines in St. Austell, and bringing it into the town centre, so that people can see the outside brought into the centre, and it sort of allows them to rethink the way that they see sort of the wild, the nature, overgrown nature that is around them, and kind of look after them. Yes, that was how we looked at it.
In your bio, you describe your design philosophy as a new way to rethink the boundary between the natural environments and the built environment. So with a strong focus on designing for other than human species. So what would you say, what agency does humans have within the design of your work? And how do you design for fostering relationships between the natural environment and humans?
I mean, I guess the key thing for us was to think about how humans and nature could both inhabit the building that we were retrofitting. I mean, the building itself already had a vast amount of sort of uninvited nature on it, because it wanted to grow there, the cracks in the wall or the moss on the roof. But the issue was that it was seen as untidy. And people want to maintain their buildings. They want their building to look smart, and especially if it's a business, it needs to look sort of cared for and looked after. So I guess you could say that what we were trying to do was to take this element of sort of like natural colonization of a building and combine it with our culture in order to allow these things to be invited onto the facade. So the building, the tiles basically recreate the natural cracks in the wall, and the shape of it and the sort of colours and everything, they do feel a lot like the landscape around. So you've created a story for the people who have watched all these clay pits be recolonized by plants and nature as they've been disused. And so we translated that onto our facade in order for people to feel a sort of sense of identity and pride. And the plants colonizing the facade are then allowed to be there because they're seen as a part of the aesthetic. So I guess we were trying to get them to work together.
Sounds really beautiful how you discuss the kind of relationships between like the cracks and what's happened in the built environment, how this allows for kind of non-humans to like colonize in their own way. You mentioned you mentioned slow architecture. So I was wondering, what is your definition of a slow architecture, and how should we consider slow architecture as a form of non-extractiveness?
Yeah, so we see slow architecture as a rebellion against prizing of short-term economic gain over long-term sustainability. And as a sort of, we think that the undulating design of our tiles lends itself to slow architecture because it because of the requirement to sort of keep it within the budget, and the sort of form of it is best suited to manual labor and therefore eliminating machinery pollution and forming an architectural element that will last for a long time. And through the slow architecture, I think what we've actually learned is that because we were able to look at the process, like be part of the process throughout the whole sort of from the making of the sourcing of the clay to making of the tiles and figuring out how it will be processed and firing of it, we kind of learned so much about the method, and it allows us to think, can we change this method, because it's high firing ceramics is very energy intensive, and not necessarily a non-extractive way of doing things in a way, but I think as architects who sort of normally design things on a CAD or in a very 2D way, by being part of the making process as well, it allows us to kind of feed back into thinking about where we get our materials and how we design.
So your Edible Hinterlands project touches on labour that can be seen as an element of labour can be, as a process, be seen as an element of extraction. The work you have shown uses a lot of manual labour, as you just mentioned in the previous answer, to produce the ceramic tiles, which in turn reduces the amount of pollutants in the atmosphere during the manufacturing processes, but then however uses a lot of physical activity and time in order to test and experiment and produce this. So do you think about the scalability of your designs in regards to labour, and how do you consider and manage labour for both humans and non-humans in both the design process of making these kind of ceramic objects, but then also in the output as well?
I mean, this is actually a difficult question, because the scalability of the design has been something that we've had a lot of conversation about, and it is a difficult factor, but it's more difficult. I mean, it's very possible to scale up the design, and making something by hand is entirely possible. It's just very difficult to do it if you're on a budget. And we were working with a community funding, essentially, so we didn't want to be greedy with the design, because we're also trying to give back to the community we were working with. But it is difficult. I mean, if you had a factory, you're sure you could do it, but it's two people doing it. It's really hard. And also there's a lot of questions around the ethics of some of what we were doing. We had to have a lot of discussions about, I mean, we originally started by researching iron oxide as a waste pigment from kaolin production, which is all around where we were. But then the ethics of foraging for it, are you degrading the landscape more the more you take? Can you sort of forage little and often, or are you also taking away topsoil where organisms are trying to re-establish themselves? So the project theory can be scaled, but it's not an easy thing to do. It sort of for us, it has raised a lot of questions and a lot of new research that we need to do in order to figure out if it is something we can upsize on a larger method. Because the project itself would be great, if you could actually change people's perceptions to include plants on buildings and allow them to grow where they want to grow. It would be good. It's just trying to change the economic situation is hard.
Yeah, I guess also moving to a more kind of factory-led process, then problems that you were mentioning earlier about pollutants, then that's the discussion that then comes across. It's like another kind of extractive process that you now have to deal with. Now you're moving into a different system. And the final question I had for you guys is, what role does retrofitting within the built environment have as a tool to aid an architecture that is non-extractive?
Yeah, so we've thought about this. I mean, I think it's the one simple, first simple answer is that the fact that we haven't taken off anything off the existing building, I suppose, helps to not create any waste, and you're just adding to the existing fabric. So in essence, you're adding, an additional thermal mass to the building. So that's sort of all in line with the whole benefits of retrofitting that we often talk about. And I think learning from the process that we've come through so far, I think there's a lot more that we can do to make the building even more future-proof, such as sort of making the tiles fixed in a mechanically fixed way so that it can be reused in the future if someone changes, because facades often are, you hope it lasts for a long time, but then there will be a new owner and they might want to change the building into something completely different, in which case you hope that you can relocate what you've done and put it somewhere else. And all of that, I think this is our process now of thinking, like, how do we go from here in the future? Like, can we look into more kind of future-proof ways to create a circular economy and
also better materials. So better materials.
Exactly. And I think exactly. So I think looking at even though ceramics was the natural material for the project, because it was funded by an organization that sort of is talking about encouraging ceramics and bringing back ceramics as a sort of artistic form, it's not necessarily the most environmentally friendly material if we think about it in terms of the embodied carbon.
So that accessible if you were to do it on a, if more people were to build more elements for their building, you need a kiln for starters.
Right. Yeah. So the process of firing ceramics is kind of difficult in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So we think it would be nice to think about it in terms of materials that are more accessible and less carbon intensive. So
perfect. Thank you guys, Charlotte and Maria, for joining us at Non-Extractive Architecture. The exhibition is currently going on until January 2022. So if you are in Venice, please visit the VAC Centre and you'll see all the research that's being conducted by the residents. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.